verse 12, after Samson has devastated the fields and the offerings to Dagon, he's in the cave waiting for the Philistines, but before they come for him, 3,000 men of Judah show up, asking if they can tie him up and hand him over to the enemy. We read that in our last study. We're going to kind of continue that from verse 12. And they said to him, "We've come down to bind you, that we may give you into the hands of the Philistines." And Samson said to them, "Swear to me that you will not attack me yourselves." They said to him, "No, we will only bind you and give you into their hands. We will surely not kill you." So they bound him with 2 new ropes and brought him up from the rock. It was noted in a few commentaries that I read, said that Samson could have taken out these 3,000 men of Judah pretty easily, but instead he allowed them to tie him up as long as they don't kill him. Maybe they thought, we'll hand Samson over to the Philistines, we'll get on their good side, and then Samson is going to use his supernatural strength and defeat the Philistines. And so it's going to be a win-win for everybody. But it doesn't quite go that way. Verse 14, when he came to Lehi, the Philistines came shouting to meet him. Then the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him, and the ropes that were on his arms became as flax that has caught fire, and his bonds melted off his hands. Here we see the shouting of the Philistines. The purpose of this shouting was twofold. First, this was foreshadowed in chapter 14, verse 5, when the lion comes roaring toward Samson. This was their battle cry, a loud shouting and roaring as they came for Samson. And second, this was an excited shout. They see Samson tied up and they are excited that their enemy is defeated. And so they start celebrating. Now they're actually wasting time here by laughing and mocking because they're not realizing that while they are celebrating, Samson is actually coming undone. The Bible says that the cords that are tied around his arms are melting away. They're breaking away, they're falling off, as the original text reads. What we have to know here is a bit of battle strategy with the Philistines and why this proves their foolishness in their capture of Samson. 1 Chronicles 10:3 talks about how the Philistines would use skilled archers from a distance to wound their opponents, making it easier to pursue them and to capture them. But here we see they don't do this. They haughtily rejoice in seeing Samson tied up, and their archers are not used. And this gives Samson time to regroup and fight back, because we read now that the Spirit of the Lord comes upon him in power. Let's keep reading in verse 15. And he found a fresh jawbone of a donkey and put out his hand and took it, and with it he struck 1,000 men. Samson has no weapon here. He picks up a jawbone of a donkey, a fresh one, not an old brittle one, so at least he has that going for him. And he takes out 1,000 men. Can we just cut to Judah for a second and see the looks on their faces? Did they really think they didn't have a good chance at defeating the Philistines? With their 3,000-man army and Samson who could take out 1,000 men on his own, and yet Judah still doesn't come to help Samson. This is showing again the foolishness and the cowardliness of Judah in this moment. And who would have thought that one jawbone would hold up to kill 1,000 men? Maybe a stronger bone would have been more effective, but it's most likely God showing them and us that the reason for this victory and any victory we have is all Him. It's His power, it's His strength, not ours. Unfortunately, Samson doesn't see it this way. He kind of takes some credit, as we can see in this song that he sings in verse 16. And Samson said, with the jawbone of a donkey, heaps upon heaps. With the jawbone of a donkey have I struck down 1,000 men. Samson takes the credit here. Now the word for donkey is the same as heap. So Samson is saying that he made heaps of Philistines, just tossing them one on top of the other, like it's nothing. Verse 17, as soon as he had finished speaking, he threw away the jawbone out of his hand, and that place was called Ramoth-Lehi. So after he's done all this, just to really dig at the Philistines, he names it Ramoth-Lehi, which means jawbone hill, or lifting up of the jawbone, just so that everyone remembers that these 1,000 Philistines were beat by one man, holding one jawbone as a weapon. And then he throws the jawbone to the side and he moves on. And I can say here, at least he didn't make a necklace out of it or start flaunting it around saying, hey, everybody, look what I did with this one jawbone. Verse 18. And he was very thirsty, and he called upon the Lord and said, you have granted this great salvation by the hand of your servant. And shall I now die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised? It's tempting to read stories like this and picture a superhero, someone almost not human with supernatural powers. But when we start doing that, we put the people that God uses in one category of great, and everyone else, and usually including ourselves, we put them and us in another category labeled just okay. And then we come across a verse like this. And it's very clear that Samson and other men and women in the Bible who did crazy, amazing things are just human like you and me. Samson is just a man, and Samson is thirsty. Maybe this is God's way of reminding Samson that at the core of it all, he is still dependent on God for life. God heard that little song that he was singing, and now he's humbling Samson and pointing him back to the giver and the sustainer of life. And it works. Samson cries out to God. I think this is still how God responds to us. When we're in a tough spot or we're being too proud, God reminds us that we have to call out to him in our distress. Whether we like it or not, some afflictions, not all, but some, are often sent to us to push us toward God, not to pull us away from him. And now look what Samson says. He says, I am your servant, who you have given me victory. He corrects his statement from before in his song of boasting. And what a great prayer for us today, to remember what God has done for us in the past as we call on him in the present, as well as calling on him for future mercy and future blessing. Verse 19, and God split open the hollow place that is at Lehi, and water came out of it. And when he drank, his spirit returned, and he revived. Therefore, the name of it was called En-hakkore. It is at Lehi to this day. God hears Samson, and he sends water. This sounds familiar. In Exodus 17, 1-7, it tells of how the people were thirsty. They cry out to God. God hears their cry, and so he instructs Moses to strike the rock, and water would come out of it. God can use whatever means necessary. He can use whatever he wants. He can use a rock. He can use a jawbone to send water to his people who are crying out to him in distress. The NIV says that God opened up a hollow place. The ESV that I'm reading from today says that God split open the hollow place. The New King James Version says that God claves a hollow place that was in the jaw. So either water came out of the jaw or water came out of the earth where the jaw was. Here's how I see it. When Samson threw the bone down, he did it pridefully. He basically tossed it aside and he said, look what I did. Now he needs water or else he's going to die. God uses the place where the bone fell, the bone that God allowed Samson to use to kill 1,000 men. That bone was sent specifically from God to Samson, and it held up while Samson slaughtered 1,000 men. And now this bone, the place where Samson threw it down pridefully, now this place is going to be used to revive Samson and keep him alive. And he names this place En-hakkore, meaning the spirit of him who called. Verse 20, and he judged Israel in the days of the Philistines 20 years. Just a reminder that round numbers are often used in the Bible, not to be exact numbers, but they're used as representations. So 40 years is the amount of time it took for a new generation to arise. Since Samson is only supposed to start the deliverance of Israel and not fully complete it, his rule was 20 years, not 40. He was only starting it. 20 years. Samson will continue to operate in the Spirit. He will continue to be used by God to deliver the people to freedom. And so it is for us today, where the Spirit of the Lord comes and dwells, there is always power and strength and freedom. And when we start moving and living in that freedom, that changes everything.